Russia, the largest country on Earth, a landmass so vast it could swallow a continent whole. It's a nation of sprawling landscapes and immense natural wealth, a titan of geography. But as history has so often shown, sheer size is not the same as strength. Tonight, we look beyond the gilded domes and towering skyscrapers to uncover a story of economic freefall, a modern tragedy played out on a grand continental scale. How did a superpower, forged in revolution and tempered by war, find its economic heartland turning to rust? This is the story of a giant brought to its knees, not by an invading army, but by the invisible hand of the market and the very visible hand of its own leaders. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the world held its breath. The Iron Curtain had been torn asunder, and from the rubble, a new Russia was expected to rise, a capitalist phoenix reborn from the ashes of communism. The West cheered, anticipating a democratic free market partner. But the reality was far from this optimistic dream. Instead of soaring, the new Russia stumbled. The transition from a centrally planned economy to a market-based one was not a gentle dawn, but a violent, disorienting shock. For 70 years, the state had dictated every aspect of economic life, from the price of bread to the production of steel. Suddenly, it was all gone. The new Russia discovered capitalism overnight, sometimes literally. One morning, people woke up with worthless rubles in their hands, their life savings erased by hyperinflation. The old certainties vanished, replaced by a brutal, chaotic scramble for survival. The 1990s became a decade of shock therapy, a radical experiment in economic liberalization that felt less like healing and more like a traumatic injury. The streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg transformed into sprawling, unregulated markets. University professors sold family heirlooms, factory workers hawked the very tools of their trade, and children became street traders, learning the harsh calculus of supply and demand before they had even finished school. This wasn't the orderly capitalism of textbooks. It was a desperate, free-for-all bazaar. At the heart of this chaos was the policy of privatization. On paper, it was a noble goal. Transfer the vast state-owned industries, oil fields, steel mills, manufacturing plants, into private hands to foster competition and efficiency. But the process was hijacked. In a series of rigged auctions and backroom deals, the crown jewels of the Soviet industrial machine were sold for a pittance to a small, well-connected group of insiders. These were the men who would become known as the oligarchs. They didn't build businesses, they acquired empires. While they amassed unimaginable fortunes, appearing in glossy magazines with their yachts and private jets, millions of ordinary Russians were plunged into poverty. The social contract was broken. Privatization didn't create a nation of shareholders. It created a handful of billionaires and a generation of the dispossessed. The numbers tell a story of almost unprecedented collapse. Russia's economy didn't just stagnate or slow down, it imploded. Throughout the 1990s, the nation's gross domestic product fell by nearly 40%, a decline steeper than America's during the Great Depression. A country that had once launched satellites into space and built the world's largest submarine fleet was now struggling to feed its own people, importing basic necessities like grain and bread. Factories that had churned out tanks and tractors fell silent, their gates chained shut, their vast halls echoing with emptiness. Entire cities, built around a single industry, became ghost towns, monuments to a failed transition. This was more than an economic crisis, it was a national humiliation, a deep wound to the collective psyche of a proud and powerful people. It was into this void of chaos and despair that a new leader stepped forward. When Vladimir Putin came to power at the end of the decade, he promised to restore order and national pride. His message was simple and powerful. The era of weakness was over. He moved swiftly to rein in the oligarchs, reasserting state control over strategic sectors of the economy, especially the lucrative energy industry. Companies like Yukos Oil, once the symbol of private enterprise, were systematically dismantled and renationalized. For a populace exhausted by a decade of turmoil, this return of the state's firm hand was a welcome relief. Stability returned, pensions were paid, and a sense of normalcy was restored. But this order came at a price, a trade-off that would define the next 2 decades of Russian history: freedom for stability, competition for control. And so, as the new millennium dawned, Russia's economy settled into a new, paradoxical state. The wild, chaotic capitalism of the 90s was gone, replaced by a system of state-led capitalism fueled by soaring global oil and gas prices. The state was back in the driver's seat, its pipelines stretching like arteries across the frozen tundra, pumping the lifeblood of the nation's budget. The cities gleamed with new construction, but just beyond the ring roads, the old Rust Belt lingered. Russia's economy became like its winters, vast, cold, and enduring, capable of weathering any storm, but never truly generating its own warmth, its own dynamic, internal life. It was a new empire, not of ideology or military might, but an empire of rust. Now, we delve deeper into the core issues that have locked this vast nation into a cycle of stagnation and vulnerability: corruption, centralization, and a crippling dependency on its own natural wealth. This is the story of how a superpower's economic resilience became its greatest illusion. On paper, the Russian state projects an image of formidable strength. We see the polished displays of military hardware rolling through Red Square, the grand pronouncements of global influence, the vast network of pipelines stretching across continents. It's a carefully constructed facade of power, meant to inspire awe and command respect. But look just beyond the parade grounds, away from the gilded halls of Moscow, and a different reality emerges. You see it in the decaying infrastructure of provincial towns, the crumbling apartment blocks that haven't seen repairs in decades, the quiet desperation etched on the faces in rural villages where opportunity has long since departed. This is the fundamental paradox of modern Russia. Much of this perceived strength is built on a precarious foundation, a mountain of borrowed money and aging Soviet-era steel. The state-of-the-art tanks are paraded for the cameras, but the roads they would need to travel on are often little more than potholed dirt tracks. The state boasts of its geopolitical reach, yet it struggles to provide basic services and a dignified life for millions of its own citizens. This isn't just a gap between perception and reality. It's a chasm. The illusion of power is maintained at a tremendous cost, siphoning resources that could be used to build a truly resilient and prosperous society. Instead, they are poured into propping up a narrative, a grand spectacle that masks a deep-seated fragility. To understand why this gap exists, we must look at the very operating system of the country. In many nations, corruption is a problem, a bug in the system that needs to be fixed. In Russia, for many, corruption didn't just infect the system, it became the system. It's the unspoken language of business, the unwritten rule of politics, the invisible hand that guides everything from massive state contracts to minor bureaucratic permits. This isn't just about a few bad apples. It's a systemic, deeply ingrained culture of graft that has metastasized over decades. Imagine a vast, hierarchical network where loyalty is valued far more than competence, and personal enrichment is the primary motivation. From the highest echelons of the Kremlin down to the smallest municipal office in the countryside, progress is often not measured in projects completed or lives improved, but in kickbacks secured and bribes paid. This shadow economy operates in parallel to the official one, hollowing it out from the inside. When a new road is budgeted, a significant portion of the funds may disappear into a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. When a hospital needs new equipment, the contract is awarded not to the best bidder, but to the one with the right connections. It's a machine that grinds down initiative, punishes honesty, and rewards cronyism. This corruption machine doesn't just steal money, it steals the future, creating a landscape where genuine innovation and fair competition cannot possibly thrive. And what fuels this entire machine? Russia was blessed, or perhaps cursed, with some of the world's most abundant natural resources. Seemingly endless reserves of oil and natural gas lie beneath its frozen soil. For decades, this immense wealth has flowed into the state's coffers, a seemingly inexhaustible stream of revenue. With this river of petrodollars, Russia could have built a future. It could have invested in world-class education, diversified its economy, fostered a vibrant tech sector, and modernized its infrastructure from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. The potential was limitless. Instead, it built a dependency. The easy money from oil and gas became a narcotic, dulling the incentive to innovate or reform. Why struggle to build a complex, competitive manufacturing base when you can simply drill a hole in the ground and watch the money pour out? This created what economists call the resource curse, a paradox where countries with great natural wealth often have less economic growth and worse development outcomes. For Russia, its pipelines became the bars of a golden cage. The entire economic model, the state budget, and the stability of the regime became tethered to the volatile price of a handful of commodities on the global market. This wasn't building a resilient economy. It was building a high-stakes gamble, mortgaging the nation's long-term prosperity for short-term cash flow. Then, as the specter of conflict returned to the international stage, Russia reverted to its most familiar habits. The pivot towards a war economy wasn't just a strategic shift, it was a convenient mask for underlying economic weaknesses. Suddenly, massive increases in military spending could be framed as a sign of economic strength and patriotic revival. Factories that once sat idle were repurposed to churn out tanks, missiles, and ammunition. The state media celebrated rising production figures in the defense sector as proof that the economy was thriving despite sanctions and international pressure. But this is a deceptive and unsustainable boom. Pouring resources into the military-industrial complex creates a closed loop. It generates activity, yes, but it does not produce goods that improve people's lives or create lasting value for the wider economy. A new tank doesn't add to a nation's productive capacity in the same way a new tractor or a new hospital does. It consumes vast amounts of capital, materials, and skilled labor that are desperately needed elsewhere. The war economy became a way to centralize control further, justify austerity and social spending, and rally the population around a common cause, all while ignoring the deep-seated structural problems that were never addressed. It was the ultimate act of kicking the can down a road that was already crumbling. And so we arrive at the final stark reflection on the price of this path. A nation can indeed project immense power. It can annex territory, silence its critics, and even attempt to rewrite the pages of history to fit its narrative. It can build armies and launch satellites, commanding the world's attention through force and fear. But there is one thing no empire, no matter how powerful, can command into existence: prosperity built on a foundation of trust. True, sustainable economic strength doesn't come from the barrel of a gun or the flow from a pipeline. It grows from an environment where property rights are secure, where the law is applied equally to all, and where citizens trust that their hard work will be rewarded, not expropriated. Without that trust, all that remains is a brittle shell. Power without prosperity is not strength, it is simply survival. It is the endless, exhausting effort of holding on to what you have, forever fearful of the moment it all collapses. As we gaze upon this immense nation, stretching across 11 time zones, we see a story not of strength, but of a profound and tragic missed opportunity. A giant, shackled by its own past, adrift in a future it failed to build. Thank you for watching. If this exploration of the deeper forces shaping our world resonates with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this.